The red dress felt like blood against her skin. Kendra Blackwell had worn it to feel powerful, but standing in the penthouse of Seoul's most feared man, she'd never felt more like prey. Behind her, the door clicked shut. Across the room, Ji-Seok Shin removed his jacket in silence. When he unbuttoned his shirt, she saw it, the lotus tattoo blooming across his chest like a beautiful warning. His voice cut through the rain-soaked silence. "I'll give you all 13 inches. She didn't know if it was a promise or a threat. Before we dive into Kendra and Ji-Seok's intense love story, do me a quick favor, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. My mom said I'd never reach 1,000 subscribers. Let's prove her wrong together. Now, let's begin." The red lace dress clung to Kendra like a second skin borrowed from a roommate, too tight in the chest, too short in the hem. It was the kind of dress meant for a woman who knew how to command a room. Kendra Blackwell was not that woman. She was a graduate student who lived on instant noodles and library coffee, whose idea of danger was a late paper, not this. The penthouse suite at the Shilla Hotel stretched before her like a crime scene waiting to happen. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the rain-soaked Seoul skyline, each droplet catching the glow of 1,000 city lights. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured rainbows across marble floors so pristine she was afraid her cheap heels would leave marks. Everything here whispered, money, power, untouchable. Everything here screamed, you don't belong. But she didn't have a choice anymore. Her visa had been revoked 3 days ago. Her scholarship sponsor had pulled funding without explanation. Immigration had given her 2 weeks to leave South Korea, the country that had become more home than Jamaica ever was. Then he had appeared at the embassy, this stranger in an expensive suit, and offered her the deal that brought her here tonight. "Marry me, I'll make your problems disappear." She'd said yes because desperate people don't ask questions. Now, standing in his private sanctuary while thunder rattled the windows, she wondered if she'd just sold her soul. The door behind her clicked shut, not a slam, but a whisper of finality that made her jump. She spun around, heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. Ji-Seok Shin stood framed in the doorway to the master suite. He wasn't just tall. He was a force of nature compressed into human form. Even motionless, he seemed to pull all the oxygen from the room, leaving her gasping for air that suddenly felt too thin. His black suit was tailored to perfection, cut to emphasize shoulders that looked like they could carry the weight of empires. His dark hair was swept back, still damp from a shower, a few rebel strands falling across a face carved from stone and shadows. But it was his eyes that trapped her. Dark, unblinking, storm-gray irises that held the weight of violence and secrets she couldn't begin to imagine. They locked onto hers with the precision of a sniper's scope, and Kendra felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. He moved toward her with the fluid grace of a predator, no wasted motion. No hurry, absolute control. Each step deliberate, each breath measured. When he stopped 3 feet away, the air between them crackled with electricity. The scent of him hit her: clean soap, sandalwood, rain, and something darker. Something that whispered of smoke and danger and sleepless nights. Kendra. Her name left his lips like a verdict. His voice was low, accented with that particular soul cadence that turned every word into music. But this wasn't a song. This was a summons, a command, a claiming. She managed a shaky nod, not trusting her voice. "I am Ji-Seok Shin." He didn't extend his hand, didn't smile. His gaze simply continued its dissection of her face, her trembling hands, the rapid rise and fall of her chest. "I assume you understand what happens now." "You said." Her voice cracked. She swallowed hard and tried again. "You said you'd help me stay in Korea. That's all I know." Something flickered in those storm-gray eyes, not quite amusement, not quite approval. He reached up and began unbuttoning his suit jacket with methodical precision, shrugged it off, let it fall across the back of a leather chair. Then his fingers moved to his white dress shirt. Kendra's breath caught as he unfastened the top button. Then the second, third, fourth. The fabric parted like curtains, revealing a stage. And what lay beneath stole every coherent thought from her mind. Ink, acres of it. A massive lotus mandala bloomed across his chest, intricate petals and geometric patterns spiraling outward from his sternum, flowing over sculpted muscle, wrapping around his shoulders, disappearing beneath the fabric still clinging to his arms. The tattoo was a masterpiece. Each line sharp and deliberate, each shadow placed with intention. Beautiful, terrifying, impossible to look away from. Beneath the ink, she could see scars. Old ones. Stories written in his flesh that she didn't know how to read. "Do you know why I chose you?" His voice cut through her paralysis. She shook her head, unable to form words. He took another step closer. Close enough that she had to tilt her head back to hold his gaze. close enough that she could see the faint stubble along his jaw, the small scar bisecting his left eyebrow, the way his pupils dilated as they traced the curve of her mouth. "Because at the embassy," he said quietly, "when the officials told you to leave, you looked at me. Everyone else looked away. But you—" His hand lifted, and she flinched, but he didn't touch her. His fingers hovered a breath from her cheek. "You looked me in the eyes like you saw a person, not a monster." Thunder cracked outside. Rain lashed the windows like the sky was trying to break through. "You're trembling." It wasn't a question. His eyes dropped to where her hands clutched the fabric of her dress. "Are you afraid of me?" "Yes. I don't know you." "No." He lowered his hand. "But you will. You'll know me better than any living soul before this is over." "Is that—" She forced herself to breathe. "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise." He reached into his pocket and produced a small black velvet box, flipped it open. Inside, a diamond ring caught the light and threw stars across the walls, massive, brilliant, cold. "Tomorrow, we marry. A civil ceremony. Quick, legal, binding." The word binding felt like chains. "After that," he continued, his voice dropping even lower, "you'll live under my protection, under my name, under my roof. No one will touch you. No one will harm you. No one will even think about you without my permission." Protection. It sounded like a cage. "But you need to understand something, Kendra." He stepped closer, still close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough that his next words brushed against her lips like a phantom kiss. "My world is not safe. It's built on blood and secrets and choices that keep me awake at night. There will be danger. There will be shadows. If you walk through that door with me." He paused, and for the first time, something raw flickered across his face. Something almost vulnerable. "You'll be the most protected woman in Seoul, but you'll also be mine. Mine." The word hung in the air between them, not a question, not a request, but an absolute truth. Her heart was a war drum. Her mind screamed run, but her feet stayed rooted to the marble floor. He lifted his hand again, and this time, his fingers made contact barely, their brush against her jawline that sent lightning racing down her spine. His skin was rough, calloused, warm. His touch was surprisingly gentle. "I need you to know," he murmured, his thumb grazing the corner of her mouth, "that once you're mine, I protect what's mine with everything I am. My life, my name, my empire." His eyes darkened to pitch black. "All of it for you." Then he leaned in until his lips were a whisper from her ear, his breath hot against her skin, and spoke 5 words that shattered her completely. "I'll give you all 13 inches." Kendra gasped a sharp, shocked intake of air. Her eyes went wide. Heat flooded her face. He pulled back just enough to watch her reaction, and the ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Not kind, not cruel, just knowing." "Don't misunderstand, Jagia," he said, the Korean endearment sounding like a dark promise. "You'll learn what it really means in time." Then he released her, stepped back, and slid the ring box into her trembling hand. His fingers lingered for just a moment, long enough for her to feel the calluses, the strength, the barely restrained power in his grip. "Think about it tonight," he said. "Tomorrow at noon, a car will come for you. If you get in, there's no going back. If you don't—" He shrugged, but his eyes betrayed him. There was something desperate hidden in those storm-gray depths. "Then I'll find another way to save you. But you'll never know what those 13 inches meant." He turned and walked toward the master suite, his tattooed chest still on display, every muscle moving with predatory grace. At the doorway, he paused and looked back over his shoulder. "Sweet dreams, Kendra Blackwell." Then he disappeared into the darkness, leaving her alone in the crystal-lit silence. Kendra stood frozen, the ring box burning in her palm like a live coal. Outside, Seoul's lights blurred through rain-streaked glass. Inside, her heart hammered a rhythm she didn't recognize, part fear, part curiosity, part something wild and reckless that she'd never felt before. 13 inches. What did it mean? A measurement of something she didn't want to imagine. A code? A test? The question consumed her, burning away the fear until all that remained was a desperate, aching need to know. She lifted the ring box and opened it. The diamond caught the light again, throwing fractals across her face. It was beautiful. It was a trap. It was a promise of protection from a man who looked like he could destroy worlds. The hook was set. The innocent exchange student was gone. In her place stood a woman teetering on the edge of a cliff, desperate to see what lay in the shadows below. And somewhere in the darkness of the master suite, Ji-Sok Shin leaned against the wall, eyes closed, hand pressed against the lotus tattoo over his racing heart, and wondered if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life, or found his salvation. Okay, are you hooked yet? Because trust me, you haven't seen anything yet. If you're already Team Jisok, smash that like button. And my mom told me I'd never make it as a storyteller. Help me prove her wrong by subscribing right now. Seriously, it takes 2 seconds and it means everything. Now let's see what happens next. The wedding? The ceremony didn't take place in a grand cathedral or a flower-filled garden. Instead, Kendra found herself in a private villa overlooking the Han River, the Seoul skyline glittering in the distance like scattered diamonds. Only 4 people witnessed their vows, a stone-faced officiant, and 3 of Jisok's men, each wearing identical black suits and expressionless masks that revealed nothing. Kendra wore a modern hanbok in deep crimson silk, the traditional Korean dress tailored to fit her curves. When she'd first seen it laid out in her hotel room that morning, she'd almost cried. It was the most beautiful thing she'd ever worn, and she was wearing it to marry a stranger. Jisok stood at the altar in a black suit that probably cost more than her entire education. His eyes never left her face as she walked toward him. No aisle, no music, just the soft whisper of silk and the hammer of her heart. When the officiant asked for their vows, Jisok's voice was steady, absolute, final. I do. Then he took her hand, that same electric touch from the penthouse, and slid a heavy gold band onto her finger. It settled against her skin like a brand, like a claim, like forever. Now you're under my protection, he whispered as the officiant pronounced them husband and wife. No one touches what's mine, the sanctuary. He didn't take her to a bustling hotel or a crowded honeymoon resort. Instead, a sleek black car drove them through winding mountain roads to a modern glass house perched on the edge of a misty lake. The world here was painted in watercolors, soft morning fog, pine green mountains, water like polished silver. It was a sanctuary, a world away from the shadows he'd warned her about. This, Kendra understood, was a part of him he showed to no one else. For the first few days, they existed in a careful dance. Jisok was often on his phone, his voice a low, commanding murmur in rapid Korean. But the moment he found her reading on the deck, or watching the sun rise through floor-to-ceiling windows, everything about him softened. The hard lines of his face would ease. The ice in his eyes would melt. And he would sit beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, and ask about the book she was reading or if she wanted to walk along the water's edge. He was trying, she realized. This dangerous man was trying to be gentle for her. One afternoon, she found him standing on the dock, staring out at the mountains. The sun caught the edges of his profile, strong jaw, sharp cheekbones, that small scar through his eyebrow. He looked like a warrior contemplating battle. She walked up beside him, and without a word, he took her hand. The touch was becoming familiar now. Warm, steadying. Are you happy here, Kendra? His voice was quiet. She looked at him, really looked at him. At the man beneath the tattoos and the tailored suits and the empire of secrets. I don't know you enough to be happy or unhappy, she said honestly. I feel like I'm living with a beautiful stranger. He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. What do you want to know? She didn't hesitate. The 13 inches. What did you mean? A slow, genuine smile transformed his face, the first real one she'd ever seen from him. It was breathtaking. I wondered when you would ask. The revelation. That evening, he led her to the rooftop terrace. Seoul's distant lights twinkled like fallen stars. The air smelled of rain and pine. He guided her to a cushioned bench and sat beside her, his hand finding hers like it belonged there. The first time I saw you, he began, his voice a low rumble in the darkness. You were at the embassy. Everyone else looked at the floor when I walked in. Fear, disgust, shame. But you, he squeezed her hand. You looked me in the eyes. And you smiled, like I was just a person, not a monster. Kendra's throat tightened. I knew in that moment, he continued, that my world of shadows would either destroy that light in you, or I'd have to move heaven and earth to protect it. He turned to face her fully, and in the moonlight, she saw something raw and unguarded in his expression. My warning at the wedding was real. I'm not a safe man, Kendra. I don't know how to love softly. My world is built on blood and iron and choices that haunt me. His thumb stroked circles on the back of her hand. But what I do know how to do is protect, and once I claim someone as mine, I never let go. He lifted her hand and pressed it flat against his chest, right over his heart. Through the fabric of his shirt, she felt it thump, 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 a wild, powerful rhythm that matched her own. 13 inches, he whispered, his face so close she could feel his breath on her lips. That's the size of the human heart. I wasn't talking about anything else, Jagia. I was warning you that I'd give you all of it. Every beat, every broken piece, the fierce parts, The protective parts. The parts that scare even me. His free hand came up to cradle her face, impossibly gentle. I'll protect you with my life, that was my first promise. But tonight, my promise is that I'll love you with the same fierceness. Every last inch of this heart, he pressed her palm harder against his chest, belongs to you. The good, the bad, the beautiful, the ugly. All 13 inches, forever. The mystery unraveled not into something frightening, but into the most profound confession she could imagine. This man, who commanded empires built on fear, was offering her the one thing he'd probably never given anyone, his whole, complete, vulnerable heart. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but they were tears of wonder. "Jisok," she breathed. That was all the invitation he needed. He leaned in, and his lips found hers. The kiss wasn't timid. It was acclaiming but also a gift. It was fireworks and coming home and the answer to every question she'd been afraid to ask. His mouth moved against hers with hunger and reverence, like she was both treasure and salvation. She kissed him back, her hands sliding up his chest, feeling the tattoo beneath the fabric, feeling the heart that beat only for her. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "It's yours," he murmured, voice thick with emotion. "It's been yours since you looked at me like I was human. It'll be yours until my last breath." Kendra smiled, the first real, radiant smile since this whole crazy journey began. "Then I'll take it," she whispered back. "All 13 inches. And I'll keep it safe forever." Under a blanket of stars, their connection was sealed. No longer an arrangement, no longer a transaction, but a bond, deep and wild and unbreakable. The storm had arrived, and she was no longer afraid to get swept away. But as perfect as their sanctuary felt, Kendra knew the shadows were still waiting. And before she could truly understand the man she'd married, she needed to know the story he'd been hiding. The story of how Jisok Shin became Seoul's most feared mafia boss. The story written in scars beneath his lotus tattoo. The story that would change everything. But to understand how a Jamaican exchange student ended up in the arms of Seoul's most dangerous man, you have to rewind. 3 weeks earlier. Before the penthouse. Before the 13 inches. Before everything changed. The Seoul immigration office smelled like desperation and cheap disinfectant. Kendra Blackwell sat in a plastic chair, her student visa rejection letter crumpled in her shaking hands. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry insects, and every official who passed her looked through her as if she were already gone. Scholarship funding withdrawn. Sponsor unresponsive. Student visa status revoked. You have 14 days to vacate the Republic of Korea. 14 days. 2 weeks to pack up the life she'd built over 3 years. To abandon her research. To leave the tiny apartment in Hongdae with the window that overlooked the cherry blossom trees. To go back to Kingston. To her aunt's crowded house. To a future that felt like suffocation. She'd called everyone. Her program advisor didn't return her emails. Her sponsor's number was disconnected. The emergency scholarship fund had a 6-month waiting list. Every door had slammed shut in her face. Pride told her to hold her head high. Desperation made her want to scream. "Miss Blackwell?" A tired official called her number in accented English. "You need to schedule deportation logistics at window 7. Deportation. The word felt like a slap. Kendra stood on trembling legs, gathered her documents, and walked toward her doom. The hallway was crowded, other students, migrant workers, families clutching papers and hope. She was just another statistic, another dream expiring. Then the crowd parted. She didn't understand why at first. People simply moved, created space. A ripple of tension passed through the hallway like wind through grass. Then she saw him. A man in a charcoal suit, flanked by 2 others in black. Tall, commanding, moving through the immigration office like he owned it, and maybe he did. Officials straightened their spines. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the fluorescent light seemed to buzz more quietly. His eyes swept the hallway with cold precision, cataloging threats, calculating exits. And then, for just a fraction of a second, those storm-gray eyes met hers. Kendra didn't look away. She didn't know why. Maybe because she was too tired to be afraid. Maybe because in that moment, seeing someone else who clearly didn't belong in this bureaucratic nightmare felt like spotting another survivor in a shipwreck. His gaze lingered. Something flickered across his face. Surprise? Interest? Before he continued past her, disappearing into a private office that required 3 keycards to access. A woman beside Kendra let out a held breath. "Do you know who that was?" she whispered in Korean. Kendra shook her head. "That's Shin Ji-suk, from the Shin Corporation." The woman's eyes were wide. "They say he's connected to, well, let's just say you don't want to owe him money." Kendra filed the information away as irrelevant. Men like that existed in a different universe, one she'd never touch. She was wrong. 5 days later, Kendra was translating at a business dinner in Gangnam, a last-ditch effort to scrape together deportation funds. The restaurant was the kind where prices weren't listed, and everyone spoke in polite euphemisms that barely masked the blood money changing hands under the table. She sat in the corner, invisible in her simple black dress, translating English technical documents for a table of Korean businessmen who barely acknowledged her existence. Then the temperature in the room dropped. Kendra looked up and felt her stomach plummet. Shin Ji-sok stood in the entrance, flanked by the same 2 men from the immigration office. Tonight he wore all-black suit, shirt, tie like he was dressed for a funeral or a execution. The restaurant owner rushed forward, bowing so deeply his forehead nearly touched his knees. Ji-sok said something in low Korean, and suddenly the private room in the back was being cleared. Kendra kept her head down and focused on her translations. Don't be seen, don't be remembered. Finish the job and leave. Miss Blackwell. Her head snapped up. He stood 3 feet away, those storm-gray eyes locked on her face like a targeting system. You know my name? Her voice came out shakier than she wanted. I know everything. He glanced at the papers spread before her. You're translating merger documents for Hanmi-Tech. You're doing it for 50,000 an hour, far below market rate, which means you're desperate. Heat flooded her face, shame and anger mixing into something combustible. I don't see how that's your business. It becomes my business when I make it my business. He pulled out the chair beside her and sat, uninvited. His presence was overwhelming, the scent of expensive cologne and something darker, the heat radiating from his body, the absolute certainty in his every movement. Your visa was revoked. Scholarship funding pulled. You have 9 days left in Korea. Her blood ran cold. How do you... I told you. I know everything. He leaned back, studying her like she was a chess piece he was considering moving. I also know you've been searching for immigration lawyers, applying for emergency visas. Contacted 11 different sponsors, all denied. The accuracy was terrifying. Are you following me? I'm considering making an investment. His eyes never left her face, and I always research my investments thoroughly. I'm not an investment. I'm a person. In my world, those aren't mutually exclusive. He reached into his jacket and produced a business card. Heavy cardstock, embossed lettering, Shin Ji-sok, CEO, Shin Corporation. A phone number, nothing else. I have a proposal for you, Miss Blackwell. I'm not interested in whatever you're selling. Not selling, offering. He slid the card across the table. I need a wife. The world tilted. Excuse me? Temporary. Legal. Mutually beneficial. His voice was clinical, detached, like he was discussing a business merger and not a marriage. I have international holdings that require stabilization. A foreign marriage creates beneficial optics, diverts certain scrutiny. You want me to marry you so you can launder money through international loopholes, Kendra translated. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I knew you were smart. And I know this is insane. She pushed back from the table. Find someone else. His hand shot out, not grabbing, just blocking her path. Everyone else will ask questions, demand explanations, want things I'm not willing to give. His eyes pinned her in place. You, Miss Blackwell, just want to stay in Korea. I can make that happen. Tonight. Her throat tightened. What's the catch? No catch. Terms are simple. He ticked them off on his fingers. We marry. Civil ceremony. You receive permanent residency. A stipend. Housing. You attend events as my wife when required. You ask no questions about my business. In 2 years, we divorce quietly. You keep the residency and a settlement that will fund any future you want. And what do you get? Legitimacy. Distraction. A beautiful, educated foreign wife who makes me look like a respectable international businessman instead of what I actually am. The honesty was startling. Which is something you should probably never ask about. He stood, towering over her. My car is outside. If you want to discuss this further, you have 2 minutes to decide. Then he walked away, leaving her drowning in impossible choices. The inside of Ji-sok's limousine smelled like leather and power. Kendra sat on one side, he on the other, the space between them filled with unspoken tension. I'll protect you, he said, staring out at Seoul's neon-soaked streets. While you carry my name, no one will touch you. No one will threaten you. You'll want for nothing. Except freedom. You'll have more freedom than you do now. He finally looked at her. Right now, you're cornered, powerless, about to be erased from this country like you never existed. I'm offering you a choice, agency, a future. This isn't a choice, it's blackmail. It's survival. His voice hardened. And if you're too proud to survive, then get out. I'll find someone else by morning. The bluff, if it was a bluff, worked. Kendra's hand froze on the door handle. Why me? She whispered. Really? He was quiet for a long moment. Because when I saw you at the immigration office, you looked me in the eyes. Everyone else saw a monster. You just saw a person. He turned away. I need someone who can do that convincingly in public. The car stopped. One of his men opened the door, handed Jisok a manila folder. Inside, a marriage contract. Her name already printed. Read it. Sign it. Change your life. He produced a pen. Or don't, and board your flight next week. Kendra's hands trembled as she took the folder. The contract was thorough, clinical, shockingly generous in its terms. 2 years, a performance, an escape. She thought of her tiny apartment, her unfinished research, the cherry blossoms she wouldn't see bloom again. She thought of the man across from her, dangerous, honest, offering her a lifeline wrapped in thorns. At 11:47 p.m., she signed her name. Jisok took the contract, examined her signature, then met her eyes. Understand this, Kendra Blackwell, soon to be Shin. Every decision you make from now on echoes through my world. Every smile, every word, every breath, they all belong to me now. At least in public. He leaned forward until she could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. Welcome to the shadows. The door opened. She stepped out into the soul night. The contract signed, her fate sealed, and no idea that the man in the limousine had just made the most dangerous decision of his life. Falling for his fake wife was never part of the plan. The villa appeared through morning mist, like something from a dream or a warning. It perched on the edge of the Han River, all clean lines and glass walls reflecting water and sky. Traditional Korean architecture merged with modern minimalism. Curved tile roofs met floor-to-ceiling windows. Stone pathways wound through carefully manicured gardens where cherry blossoms were just beginning to bloom. Beautiful. Isolated. The kind of place where secrets could be kept forever. Kendra stood in the bridal suite, staring at her reflection in a full-length mirror, and barely recognized herself. The dress was a masterpiece, a modern hanbok in crimson silk that clung to her curves before flowing into a dramatic train. The bodice was traditional jeogori lace, hand-embroidered with gold thread that caught the light like captured fire. But the color, red. In Korean weddings, brides wore white or pastel. Red was reserved for celebrations, for passion, for blood. It suits you, a voice said from the doorway. Kendra turned to find an elderly woman, the villa's housekeeper. She'd been told holding a small lacquered box. Shin Sa-jung-nim chose it himself, the woman continued in careful English. Red for a bride who is not afraid. I'm terrified, Kendra admitted. The woman smiled, sad and knowing. Then you are wise. Fear keeps us alive in his world. She opened the box, revealing a delicate gold headpiece adorned with small jade butterflies. But perhaps you will be the one who changes that world. She placed the headpiece in Kendra's hair with practiced hands, then stepped back. You look like a queen, or a sacrifice. In his world they are often the same thing. Then she left, and Kendra was alone with her reflection and the weight of what came next. The ceremony took place in the villa's central courtyard, open to the sky. No flowers, no music, no guests beyond 3 men in identical black suits who stood like stone sentinels at the garden's edge. Jisok's lieutenants, she'd learned their names but not their stories. Park, Kim, Lee. Each one looked capable of terrible violence performed with surgical precision. An officiant waited beneath a wooden pavilion draped in white silk. He was old, his face creased with lines that spoke of countless secrets witnessed and never spoken. And then there was Jisok. He stood at the pavilion center, dressed in a black suit so perfectly tailored it looked like armor. His hair was swept back, revealing the sharp angles of his face, high cheekbones, strong jaw, that small scar through his eyebrow. He looked like a king waiting to claim his throne, or a predator waiting for prey to walk into the trap. When his eyes found hers across the courtyard, something flickered in their storm-gray depths. Not love, it was far too soon for that. But hunger, possession, a dark promise that made her knees weak. Kendra walked toward him alone. No father to give her away, no bridesmaids to support her. Just her and the crimson silk and the choice she'd already made. Each step felt like crossing into another world. The morning sun painted everything in gold and shadow. The river whispered against the shore. Somewhere, a bird sang, haunting and beautiful. When she reached him, Jisok extended his hand. She placed hers in his, and his fingers closed around hers, warm, strong, claiming. You came, he murmured, so quietly only she could hear. I signed a contract. Contracts can be broken. His thumb stroked across her knuckles. This is different. This is a vow. The officiant began speaking in formal Korean ancient words about duty and union, and two becoming one. Kendra understood maybe half of it. But she understood the weight, the finality. Jisok's responses were steady, absolute. When he said, "I do," in English for her benefit, she realized it sounded like a verdict being pronounced. Then the rings. He produced a small velvet box, opened it to reveal two bands. His was simple platinum. Hers was antique gold, intricate, clearly very old. "This belonged to my grandmother," he said, loud enough for the witnesses to hear. A performance, she reminded herself. All of this was a performance, but when he lifted her hand and slid the ring onto her trembling finger, the way he looked at her didn't feel like acting. The metal settled against her skin warm, as if it had been waiting for her. Jisok leaned close, his lips nearly brushing her ear, and whispered 6 words that changed everything. "Now you belong to my world. Not now you're my wife. Not now we're married. You belong to my world." Possession, warning, promise. The officiant pronounced them husband and wife. Jisok's hand came up to cradle her face, the touch surprisingly gentle, and he kissed her. It wasn't the claiming kiss from the lake house in her imagination. This was something else. Soft, searching. A question hidden in the press of his lips against hers. His thumb stroked her cheekbone, and for a moment, she forgot the witnesses, the contract, the performance. For a moment it felt real. Then he pulled back, and the walls were up again. He turned to his lieutenants and gave a small nod. They bowed in unison, a gesture of respect that felt more like soldiers acknowledging their general's new weapon. The ceremony was over. She was Mrs. Shin. That night, Kendra stood in the master bedroom, still wearing the crimson dress, and waited. The room was stunning traditional Korean architecture with modern luxury. A low platform bed dressed in white silk, paper screen walls that glowed softly from hidden lights, glass doors opening onto a private terrace overlooking the river. She'd prepared herself for this. The wedding night, the expectations, the man who'd made it clear she belonged to him now. The door opened. Jisok entered, already removing his jacket. Kendra's heart hammered. She clasped her hands together to stop them from shaking. He saw her fear. Something in his expression softened. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the low table near the window. "I thought—" "Sit, Kendra." She obeyed, lowering herself onto a silk cushion. He disappeared into the adjacent room and returned moments later carrying a tea service, a traditional Korean set, the pot still steaming. He sat across from her and poured with practiced precision. The scent of jasmine filled the air. "Drink," he said, sliding a cup toward her. She took it with trembling hands, confused. "I don't understand. I know what you expected." He poured his own cup but didn't drink. His eyes met hers across the table. "But I'm not going to touch you tonight, or any night until you want me to." The relief was so intense she nearly dropped the cup. "The contract says you'll be my wife in public. It says nothing about private." He leaned back, studying her. "I need you beside me at events. I need you to smile and play the role of the devoted wife. That's the transaction. What happens here?" He gestured to the space between them. "That's not something I'll take. It's something you'll give. When you're ready." "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why be kind?" His laugh was bitter. "Don't mistake this for kindness. It's selfishness." He finally lifted his cup, breathed in the steam. "I've taken a lot of things in my life, Kendra. Land, money, power, lives." His eyes darkened. "But I won't take this. Not from you." The confession hung in the air between them. "At the penthouse," she whispered. "You said you'd give me 13 inches. What did you mean?" A slow, knowing smile curved his lips. "I wondered how long before you'd ask. So tell me." "No." He stood, set down his cup. "When you understand what I meant, you'll come to me on your own. Not because of a contract, not because you're afraid or desperate or trapped, but because you choose to." He walked to the door that connected to an adjacent room, his room, she realized, a separate space. At the threshold, he paused and looked back. "Sleep well, Mrs. Shin. Tomorrow the real performance begins." Then he was gone, leaving her alone with jasmine-scented tea and a mystery that burned hotter than any touch could have. In the darkness, Kendra touched the gold ring on her finger and realized something terrifying. She wanted to know. Desperately, agonizingly. And Jisok knew it. The hook had been set deeper. And she was already caught. The penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a skyscraper in Gangnam Seoul's beating heart of wealth and power. Kendra had thought the lake house was luxury. This was something else entirely. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a 360-degree view of the city sprawling below like a circuit board of neon and ambition. Everything inside was sharp edges and clean lines. Black marble, chrome fixtures, furniture that looked like modern art. Even the air felt expensive, filtered, temperature-controlled, sterile. Beautiful, cold, like living inside a diamond. Their third day there, Kendra woke at 3 a.m. to find Ji-suk's side of the bed empty. She found him on the terrace, phone pressed to his ear, speaking rapid Korean in a voice she'd never heard him use, cold, commanding, lethal. Geu sekireul chajabwa. Naelachim gaji. Anim da jugul jeosida. She didn't understand all the words, but she caught enough. Find him. By tomorrow morning. Or everyone dies. He turned and saw her watching. His expression didn't change, didn't soften like it had at the lake house. He simply held her gaze while finishing the call, then pocketed the phone. Go back to bed. What's happening? Nothing that concerns you. He walked past her toward his study. That's the arrangement, remember? You don't ask questions. The door closed. Locked. Kendra stood alone on the terrace, the city lights blurring below, and realized the honeymoon, literal and metaphorical, was over. Life in the penthouse followed patterns she learned to read like a language. Mornings. Ji-suk disappeared into his study or left entirely, flanked by Park and Kim. Sometimes he'd return smelling like cigarette smoke and something metallic she didn't want to identify. Afternoons. Business associates would arrive, men in expensive suits with hard eyes, who would bow to her politely before disappearing into closed-door meetings where voices occasionally rose to dangerous volumes. Evenings. Sometimes Ji-suk would sit across from her at dinner, silent and distant. Other times his chair stayed empty until dawn. She was a ghost in a glass cage, beautiful, trapped, irrelevant. The only constant was Lee, the youngest lieutenant who served as her shadow and guard. He was polite, but distant, trailing her through the penthouse like a well-dressed specter. Can I go outside? She asked him on day 5. Not alone. Can I visit the library? Which one? I'll drive you. Can I breathe without permission? He almost smiled. That one's still allowed. For now. She was suffocating. The breaking point came during a business dinner on day 7. Ji-suk had warned her that morning. Important associates, international investors, critical negotiations. Her job was simple: smile, look elegant, speak only when spoken to. Be the perfect wife, he'd said, adjusting his cufflinks. Nothing more. The dinner took place in the penthouse's private dining room. 12 men, all Korean except for 2 Japanese investors, sat around a table laden with enough food to feed a village. Kendra sat beside Ji-suk in a navy silk dress, hands folded in her lap, performing her role. Invisible. Until senior associate Choi had too much soju. Shin sajangnim. Choi slurred, gesturing at Kendra with his glass. Your foreign wife is very decorative. Does she speak, or is she just for looking at? The room went quiet. Every eye turned to Ji-suk, waiting to see how he'd handle the disrespect. Ji-suk's expression didn't change. Careful, Choi. I'm just saying, Choi laughed, emboldened by alcohol and stupidity. What good is a pretty pet if she can't even understand proper business? Maybe you should have gotten a Korean wife. One who knows her place. My place, Kendra interrupted, her voice cutting clear and cold across the table, is wherever I choose to be. Right now, unfortunately, that's watching a drunk man embarrass himself. Shocked silence. Choi's face flushed red. You dare. I dare to correct you in 2 languages, if you'd prefer. She continued in flawless Korean, the formal, cutting dialect reserved for putting someone beneath you. But I imagine you're already struggling with one. Someone choked on their drink. Another man coughed to hide a laugh. Ji-suk didn't move, didn't speak, but she felt his attention laser focus on her like a physical touch. Choi stood abruptly, chair scraping. Shin sajangnim, your wife needs to learn respect. Associate Choi. Ji-suk's voice dropped to a register that made the temperature plummet. I believe you were just leaving. It wasn't a suggestion. Choi looked around the table, found no allies, and left. The door closed behind him with a quiet click that sounded like a coffin ceiling. Ji-suk lifted his glass. To my wife, he said, his eyes never leaving Kendra's face, who apparently has more bite than any of you realized. The table erupted in nervous laughter. The dinner continued, but Kendra could feel Ji-suk's gaze burning into her for the rest of the night. She was in the library, a small sanctuary off the main living area, when he found her. 2 a.m. She'd thought he was asleep. Instead, his voice came from the doorway. My study. Now. Not a request. Kendra closed her book and followed him through the darkened penthouse. His study was all leather and dark wood, the one room that felt lived in. Weapons lined one wall in a glass case. Knives, a sword, things she didn't have names for. His desk was covered in papers written in code she couldn't crack. He closed the door behind her, locked it. "What you did tonight?" He turned to face her, and she couldn't read his expression. Was either very brave or very stupid. "He disrespected me. And you, by extension. I can handle disrespect. That's not the point." He took a step closer, then another, each movement deliberate, predatory. "The point is you made yourself visible. You drew attention. In my world, attention is dangerous. Then maybe you should have married someone who's content to be invisible." Her chin lifted. "But you didn't. You chose me. I chose someone who would play a role. And I am, but I'm not a doll. I'm not decoration." She held her ground even as he closed the distance between them. "If I'm going to survive your world, I need to be able to defend myself. Even if that means using words as weapons." He stopped inches away, close enough that she could smell his cologne, sandalwood, and smoke. Close enough to see the silver flecks in his gray eyes. "You have no idea," he said softly, dangerously. "The danger of defying me." Something reckless ignited in her chest. Maybe it was 7 days of suffocation. Maybe it was the wine from dinner. Maybe it was the way he was looking at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. "Then teach me," she whispered. The words hung between them like a lit match over gasoline. For a long moment, he just stared at her. The mask of the cold Mafia boss cracked, and she saw something raw beneath hunger, fascination, something almost like fear. Then, slowly, impossibly slowly, Ji-seok smiled. Not the polite smile he used in public. Not the ghost of amusement from the lake house. This was real, dangerous and delighted and devastating. "You're not afraid of me," he said, wonder coloring his voice. "I'm terrified of you," she admitted, "but I'm more afraid of disappearing." His hand came up, fingers tracing her jawline with devastating gentleness. The touch sent electricity racing down her spine. "Everyone in my life either fears me or uses me," he murmured. "But you look at me like I'm human. Even when you're angry, even when you should run. Where would I run to?" "Exactly." His thumb brushed across her bottom lip. "You're trapped in my world. And tonight, you decided to stop being prey. Is that a problem?" His smile widened, sharp and beautiful. "It's the most interesting thing that's happened to me in years." Then he stepped back, leaving her dizzy from his proximity and the sudden absence of it. "Go to bed, Kendra. Tomorrow, we have a charity gala. Now that you've shown your teeth, everyone will be watching to see if you'll bite again." She moved toward the door, but his voice stopped her. "And Kendra?" She turned. He leaned against his desk, arms crossed, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. "For what it's worth, what you did tonight, that was the moment you became my wife. Not the contract, not the ceremony. The wall between them had cracked, and neither of them could pretend anymore that this was just a transaction." Kendra woke to an empty bed and the sound of rain hammering against glass. 3:47 a.m. Ji-seok's side was cold. He'd been gone for hours. She'd grown used to his absences, the midnight phone calls, the way he'd disappear into his study and emerge smelling like whiskey and secrets. But tonight felt different. Wrong. She found Lee asleep in the hallway, unusual for the vigilant lieutenant. Through the penthouse's glass walls, Seoul glittered below like scattered diamonds on black velvet, the rain turning everything into watercolor streaks. Ji-seok wasn't in his study, wasn't in the living room. The elevator panel showed the rooftop access light illuminated. Kendra didn't think. She stepped into the elevator, pressed R, and rode up into the storm. The rooftop was a private garden, manicured trees and massive planters, stone pathways, a reflection pool that rippled under the downpour. No shelter, just open sky and rain and the city lights bleeding into the darkness. And there, on the edge of the roof where a glass barrier was the only thing between him and a 100-story fall, sat Ji-seok. He was soaked. His white dress shirt clung to his body, transparent, revealing the full expanse of the lotus tattoo that covered his chest. His hair hung in wet strands across his forehead. An empty whiskey bottle lay on its side beside him. Kendra had never seen him like this. Unguarded, broken, human. "You shouldn't be here," he said without turning around. His words slurred, slightly drunk, she realized. She'd never seen him drunk. "Neither should you." She walked toward him, rain immediately soaking through her thin nightgown. "It's 3 a.m. and you're sitting in a storm. Fitting weather." He finally looked at her, and what she saw in his eyes made her breath catch. Pain, raw and endless. "Go back inside, Kendra. Not without you." He laughed, bitter, broken. "Always so stubborn. Don't you know by now? People who stay close to me don't survive." She sat beside him on the cold stone, the rain plastering her hair to her face. What happened? Today's date. He stared out at the city. 3 years ago. The day I killed the only woman I ever loved. The confession hung in the rain-soaked air. You didn't. I did. His voice cracked. Her name was Minso. We grew up together. She knew what I was, what I'd become, and she loved me anyway. Stupid, beautiful Minseo who thought she could save me from myself. He reached for the empty bottle, realized it was empty, let it roll away. I was meeting with a rival group. Negotiations that went bad. She wasn't supposed to be there, I'd told her to stay home. But she followed me because she was worried. His hand pressed against his chest, fingers digging into the soaked fabric. When the shooting started, she threw herself in front of me. Kendra's throat tightened. The bullet was meant for my heart. His voice dropped to a whisper. Sniper. Perfect shot. Would have killed me instantly. But Minso. He squeezed his eyes shut. I held her while she died. Told her I loved her. Promised I'd follow her. But I didn't. I'm still here. And she's been gone for 3 years. The rain fell harder, as if the sky itself was weeping. After she died, I got this. He unbuttoned his shirt with shaking hands. Let it fall open. The lotus tattoo sprawled across his chest in intricate detail, but now Kendra saw what she'd missed before. Hidden in the center of the lotus, beneath all the beautiful ink, was a scar, small, round, positioned directly over his heart. I took the bullet that killed her, he said, touching the scar with reverent fingers, dug it out of her body and had a surgeon embedded in my chest, then covered it with this. He gestured to the lotus. Beautiful things growing from violence. Except it's a lie. Nothing beautiful grows from what I am. His hand dropped. Since then, this has been hollow. Just a muscle pumping blood. Nothing more. The vulnerability was staggering. This man, Seoul's most feared Mafia boss, who commanded empires with a word, sat before her completely shattered. Kendra didn't think. She reached out and placed her hand over the lotus, over the hidden scar, over his heart. She felt it beating strong, steady, alive. Do you know what the lotus means? She asked softly. He shook his head. It's the only flower that blooms from mud. It grows in the dirtiest water, pushes through the darkness, and still opens toward the light. She met his eyes, those storm-gray eyes now swimming with unshed tears. You loved her. You lost her. You carry her with you every day. That's not hollow, Jisok. That's human. I'm a monster. You're a man. Her thumb stroked across the inked petals. A man who's been through hell and is still here, still breathing, still capable of, she hesitated, of more than you think. Something in his expression crumbled. The walls he'd built around himself for 3 years, brick by bloody brick, began to crack. She'd hate who I've become, he whispered. The things I've done since she died. The people I've hurt. Maybe. Kendra didn't lie to him. Or maybe she'd understand that you survived the only way you knew how. The rain continued its relentless assault, but neither of them moved. I brought you into this world, Jisok said, his voice breaking. Into my darkness. I told myself it was just business. Just a transaction. But tonight, sitting here, all I could think was, his hand covered hers on his chest. What happens when the bullet comes for me again? And you're standing too close? Then I duck, she said simply. He stared at her like she'd spoken a language he'd forgotten. Then, impossibly, he laughed, wet and raw but real. You're insane. I married you, didn't I? His free hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone. Rain streamed down both their faces. In that moment, he looked years younger, vulnerable, lost, searching for something he thought he'd never find again. I don't know how to do this, he confessed. How to care about someone without destroying them. Then we'll figure it out together. She turned her face into his palm. You don't have to be hollow anymore, Jisok. You just have to let someone in. For a long moment, they sat in the rain, her hand over his heart, his hand cradling her face. The city sprawled below them, indifferent to their pain and their healing. Then, slowly, Jisok pulled her against his chest. His arms wrapped around her, tentative at first, then tighter, like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to earth. She felt his heart hammering against her cheek, felt the way his breath hitched, felt the moment something inside him finally broke open. Thank you, he whispered into her wet hair. For what? For not running. For seeing the mud and staying anyway. She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. Flowers bloom from the mud, remember? Maybe we both do. Something shifted between them in that rain-soaked moment. Not love, not yet, but the foundation of it. The recognition that they were both broken things trying to heal in the darkness. That maybe, just maybe, they could bloom together. Jisok stood, pulling her up with him. He shrugged out of his soaked shirt and draped it over her shoulders, a gentleman's gesture that felt absurd given they were both already drenched. "Come on," he said, his voice still rough but steadier. "Before we both catch pneumonia." They rode the elevator down in silence, water pooling at their feet. But his hand never left hers. And for the first time since Minseo's death, Ji-Sok Shin wondered if his hollow heart might remember how to feel again. After the rooftop, something changed. Ji-Sok didn't disappear at dawn anymore. He'd sit across from Kendra at breakfast, still silent, but present. Sometimes his hand would brush hers when passing the coffee. Sometimes she'd catch him watching her with an expression she couldn't name, something between wonder and fear. The walls were still there, but they had cracks now. Light was getting through. 3 days after the storm, Kendra found herself standing outside his study at midnight. She could see the glow beneath the door, not the harsh overhead lights he used for business, but something softer, warmer. She'd been thinking about it since their wedding night. The mystery he'd left her with. The promise wrapped in 5 words that had haunted her for weeks. "I'll give you all 13 inches. She'd assumed God. She'd assumed something crude, something physical, something that made her blush in the darkness. But nothing about Ji-Sok was simple. Every word was a weapon or a vow. Every gesture calculated. So what had he really meant? Her hand lifted. Knocked. "Come in." She pushed open the door and stopped. The study had been transformed. Candles, dozens of them, lined the bookshelves, the desk, the windowsill. They cast dancing shadows across the walls, turning the severe space into something almost sacred. Ji-Sok sat in his leather chair, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand, still wearing his dress shirt from whatever meeting had consumed his evening. He looked exhausted. "Beautiful. Dangerous. Can't sleep?" he asked. "Can you?" A ghost of a smile. "Not for years." Kendra closed the door behind her and stepped into the candlelit space. She wore simple silk pajamas, nothing seductive, nothing planned. This wasn't about performance. This was about truth. "I need to know," she said. He set down his glass. "Know what?" "That night, our wedding. You said..." She forced herself to hold his gaze. "You said you'd give me all 13 inches. What did you mean?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with weeks of wondering. Ji-Sok stood slowly, like a predator deciding whether to pounce or retreat. He moved around the desk until only a few feet separated them. The candlelight caught the sharp planes of his face, turning him into something from a Renaissance painting, all shadows and gold. "I wondered," he said quietly. "How long before you'd ask?" "I'm asking now." "Why tonight?" "Because..." She struggled for words. "Because after the rooftop, after you told me about Minseo, I realized I don't actually know you at all. Just pieces, fragments. And that one phrase has been burning in my mind for weeks." He studied her face like he was memorizing it. "What did you think I meant?" Heat flooded her cheeks. I assumed it was something physical. Something sexual. Not a question." His expression didn't change. "And that terrified you?" "Yes. But you married me anyway. I didn't have a choice." "You always had a choice, Kendra." He took a step closer. "You could have run, taken your chances with deportation, started over somewhere else. But you didn't. Because I was desperate. Because you were brave." Another step. "And because some part of you wanted to know the answer to this question. Wanted to solve the mystery I left you with." He was right. God help her, he was right. "So tell me," she whispered. "What did you mean?" Ji-Sok reached out and took her hand, that electric touch she'd come to recognize, to crave. His fingers, rough and warm, laced through hers. "Come here." He guided her closer until they stood inches apart. With his free hand, he began unbuttoning his shirt slowly, deliberately, eyes never leaving hers. The fabric parted, revealing the lotus tattoo in all its intricate glory, the petals seeming to move in the candlelight. Then he placed her palm flat against his chest, directly over the hidden scar, over his heart. She felt it immediately, the strong, steady rhythm. Thump, 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 thump. "Do you feel that?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "Yes, the human heart," he said, covering her hand with his own, pressing it harder against his chest. "Measures 13 inches when it beats. From the first chamber to the last. From the point where blood enters to where it's sent back out into the world." His eyes, those storm gray eyes, held hers with devastating intensity. 13 inches of muscle and tissue, and everything that keeps us alive. Understanding crashed over her like a wave. "That night," he continued, his voice rough with emotion, "I wasn't talking about anything else. I was warning you, promising you, that I would give you all of it. Every inch. Every beat, every broken, hollow, damaged part of this, he pressed their joined hands harder against his chest, would belong to you. Tears burned behind Kendra's eyes. The good parts, he whispered. The parts that want to protect you, provide for you, keep you safe. The bad parts, the jealousy, the possessiveness, the violence I'm capable of. The dark parts I showed you on that rooftop. The parts still mourning someone I lost. All of it, Kendra. All 13 inches of my heart. That's what I was offering you. A tear escaped, sliding down her cheek. Why? Because from the moment you looked at me at that immigration office, really looked at me, like I was a person and not a monster. Something in here. He pressed her palm impossibly closer. Woke up. I thought it died with Mincio. Thought I'd buried it 3 years ago. But then you walked into my world, and suddenly this hollow thing started beating again. His free hand came up to cradle her face, thumb brushing away her tear. I'm not good with words. I'm good with threats and violence and control. So I gave you a riddle instead. A mystery. Something that would make you curious enough to stay. To wonder. To eventually ask. And now I'm asking, she breathed. Now you know. His forehead lowered until it rested against hers. She could feel his breath on her lips, warm and whiskey sweet. Could feel his heart hammering beneath her palm faster now. Wild. Alive. Every beat from this moment forward, it's yours. When you're scared, it beats for you. When you're strong, it beats for you. When you stand up to drunk associates or sit with me in the rain or look at me like you're doing right now, his voice cracked. It beats for you. The space between them was charged. Electric. Impossible. Ji-sok. But I won't take anything from you, he whispered against her lips. So close but not touching. Not a kiss. Not a touch. Not anything more. That's not how this works. I gave you my heart. What you do with it, that's your choice. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, you come to me. You choose me. Not because of a contract or fear or desperation, but because you want every broken inch of what I'm offering. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. The vulnerability there was staggering, this powerful, dangerous man offering her complete control. When you're ready, he said, voice steady despite the storm in his eyes. It's yours. Until then, I'll wait, however long it takes. He released her hand, stepped back, and the loss of his touch felt like winter. Kendra stood there, palm still tingling from the feel of his heartbeat, mind reeling from the revelation. 13 inches. Not a crude promise, a sacred one. The gift of his entire heart broken, beating, and wholly, completely hers. Get some sleep, Ji-sok said, his mask sliding back into place, but the crack still visible. Tomorrow we have that charity gala. But neither of them moved. They stood in the candlelit study, the truth finally spoken, the mystery solved, and something new and terrifying blooming between them. Not love, not yet, but the promise of it, the possibility. And for the first time since signing that contract, Kendra realized she wasn't just trapped in his world. She was choosing to stay. Jeju Island was supposed to be safe. The villa perched on black volcanic cliffs overlooking the East China Sea, isolated and serene. White walls, traditional stone architecture, gardens filled with camellias and wind-bent pines. Ji-sok had brought her here for what he called a honeymoon, though they both knew it was more about keeping her away from Seoul while he dealt with territorial disputes that had turned bloody. Just 3 days, he'd said, his hand resting on the small of her back as they'd arrived. Then we go home. That was 2 nights ago. Since then, they'd existed in a strange liminal space, not quite lovers, not quite strangers. He'd shown her the island's waterfalls and lava tubes. They'd eaten fresh seafood in silence on the terrace while the ocean roared below. At night, he'd retreat to his room, but not before his fingers would graze hers in a touch that felt like a question neither was ready to answer. The revelation about the 13 inches hung between them like a drawn breath, acknowledged but not yet released. Kendra had almost worked up the courage to knock on his door tonight, almost decided she was ready to give him her answer. Almost. Then the first window exploded. Glass shattered inward in a glittering cascade. Kendra jerked awake as gunfire erupted, sharp cracks that split the night. Shouts in Korean, running footsteps. Her door burst open. Ji-sok stood framed in the doorway, gun in hand, wearing only dark pants. The lotus tattoo on his bare chest seemed to writhe in the shadows. "Get down!" he barked. She rolled off the bed as bullets punched through the walls. Plaster dust filled the air. The acrid smell of gunpowder burned her throat. Ji-sok moved to the window, returned fire with cold precision. 2 shots. Someone outside screamed. He ejected the magazine, slammed in a new one, movement so practiced they looked like a dance. "How many?" That was Park's voice from the hallway. "At least 8. They came from the water. Ji-Sok's voice was ice. Lee? Securing the south entrance. Lee's response cut off with a grunt and the sound of breaking furniture. Fuck. Ji-Sok turned to Kendra. Bathroom. Bathtub. Get in it and don't move. What's happening? Rival syndicate. They tracked us here. He grabbed her arm, pulled her toward the bathroom. This is the part where you do exactly what I say. Understand? She nodded, throat tight with terror. He pushed her into the marble bathroom, positioned her in the cast iron tub. Stay down, no matter what you hear. Then he was gone, and she was alone with the sound of war erupting around her. Gunfire, shouting, the crash of breaking glass. Kendra pressed herself against the cold tub, hands over her ears, and tried not to imagine Ji-Sok bleeding out in the villa's elegant hallway. Minutes stretched. Or hours. Time became meaningless. Then silence. Worse than the noise. Silence meant it was over, but she didn't know who'd won. Footsteps approached the bathroom. Slow, deliberate. Mrs. Shin? A voice she didn't recognize. Korean accent. Amused. I know you're in there. Not Ji-Sok. Not Park or Lee. The door opened. A man stepped through, late 30s, expensive suit now torn and bloodstained, a knife glinting in his hand. There you are, he smiled. The foreign bride. Do you know what you're worth? What Shin Ji-Sok would give to get you back? Kendra's heart hammered. She looked for a weapon. Found nothing. Everything, the man continued, moving closer. He'd give everything, which makes you very valuable, and very dead. Ji-Sok appeared behind him like a ghost, gun pressed to the back of the man's skull. Drop the knife, Yoon. Last warning. Yoon spun instead, impossibly fast. The knife flashed. Ji-Sok dodged, but not far enough. The blade caught him across the chest, slicing through skin and ink, and blood blossomed red across the lotus tattoo. Kendra screamed. Ji-Sok's gun fired. Once. Yoon dropped. Then Ji-Sok stumbled, hand pressing against the wound. Blood poured between his fingers, soaking into his pants, dripping onto white marble tile. No. Kendra scrambled out of the tub. No, no, no. I'm fine, he swayed. You're bleeding. She caught him as his knees buckled, her arms barely strong enough to slow his descent. They collapsed together, his back against the tub, her hands immediately pressing against the wound. The cut ran diagonal across his chest, through the center of the lotus, splitting the petals. Deep. Too deep. Blood pulsed hot and wet against her palms. Apply pressure, he gasped. You need to. I am. Tears streamed down her face. Don't you dare die. Don't you dare. Not planning to. He tried to smile. Failed. His face was going pale. Park. I'm here. Park burst into the bathroom, weapon drawn, face grim. He saw the blood and cursed. I'll get the medic. Lee's securing the perimeter. 2 minutes. He disappeared. Kendra pressed harder, trying to stop the bleeding, feeling Ji-Sok's heart hammering beneath her hands, that 13-inch heart he'd promised her, now bleeding out because he'd protected her. You should have let him take me, she sobbed. You should have. Never. His hand covered hers, slick with blood, trembling. I told you. I protect what's mine. This wasn't protection. This was suicide. This was a promise kept. His eyes found hers, still storm gray despite the blood loss, still intense. Remember what I said? That I'd give you all 13 inches? Stop talking. Save your strength. See? He pressed her hand harder against the wound, and she felt his heart beating frantically beneath the torn flesh. I told you I already gave you my heart. What's a little blood? Ji-Sok. I wasn't lying, Kendra. Every beat. He coughed, and blood flecked his lips. Belongs to you. Worth protecting. Worth bleeding for. The confession broke something in her. All the fear and confusion and careful distance she'd maintained shattered like the villa's windows. This man, this dangerous, broken, impossible man, had just taken a knife for her, had protected her without hesitation, had bled across the heart he'd promised her. Don't you dare leave me, she whispered fiercely. You don't get to give me your heart and then die. That's not how this works. He smiled, then genuine, despite the pain. Not going anywhere. Haven't heard your answer yet. My answer to what? Whether you want it. All 13 inches. The offer still stands. Park returned with a medic, one of Ji-Sok's men who moved with military precision. He assessed the wound, began packing it with gauze. Ji-Sok hissed but didn't look away from Kendra. Needs stitches, the medic said. Hospital. No hospitals, Ji-Sok growled. Do it here. As they worked, Kendra stayed beside him, her bloody hand gripping his. The villa was chaos, broken glass, bullet holes, 3 bodies being dragged out by Park and Lee. But in the bathroom, with candlelight flickering because the power had been cut, time narrowed to just this. His hand in hers, his blood on her skin, his heart still beating. "I'm sorry," he said, as the medic began stitching. "You deserved better than this. Better than violence following you even here. Stop apologizing." She squeezed his hand. "You saved my life. And you stayed." His eyes held wonder. "When you could have run, you stayed. Where else would I go?" His thumb stroked across her knuckles, a gentle gesture that contrasted sharply with the violence surrounding them. "Most people run from me, Kendra. But you run toward me. Even when I'm bleeding. Even when my world is falling apart. Why?" She looked at the wound across his chest, the lotus now split but still beautiful. The 13 inches beneath it still beating, still fighting to stay alive for her. "Because," she whispered, "someone has to make sure you keep that promise. All 13 inches. I'm not letting you take them back now." Something like joy broke across his pain-twisted face. "Is that your answer?" Before she could respond, his eyes rolled back, the blood loss finally claiming him. "Ji-sok," she grabbed his face. "Stay with me. He'll be fine," the medic assured her, finishing the stitches. "The wound looks worse than it is. Missed everything vital. He'll wake up in a few hours." But Kendra didn't release his hand. Not when they moved him to the bedroom. Not when Park tried to get her to clean up and rest. Not when dawn broke over Jeju Island, painting the damaged villa in shades of gold and crimson. She stayed. Because somewhere between the contract and the candlelight and the blood, she'd stopped running from his world, and started choosing to be in it. Ji-sok woke in stages, first to pain, sharp and insistent across his chest, then to the sound of rain, gentle this time, washing away the blood and gunpowder from 3 nights ago. Finally, to the sight of Kendra asleep in the chair beside his bed, her hand still loosely holding his, her face pressed against the mattress. She'd stayed. Through everything, she'd stayed. Something in his hollow chest cracked open a little wider. 2 weeks later, they were back at the penthouse. The Jeju villa was being repaired. Yoon's syndicate had been dealt with permanently. Ji-sok's wound was healing, though it would leave a scar bisecting the lotus. Another story written in his flesh. He found her on the garden terrace at dusk. The penthouse's rooftop garden had transformed in the spring rain, cherry blossoms in full bloom, petals drifting like pink snow. Kendra sat on a stone bench beneath a willow tree, a sketchbook balanced on her knees. She was so focused she didn't hear him approach. Ji-sok stopped a few feet away, content to watch her. She'd changed since Jeju. The fear that had tightened her shoulders was gone, replaced by something quieter, stronger. She moved through his world now with a confidence that made his lieutenants straighten their spines and rivals reassess their strategies. She'd stopped being the foreign bride. She'd become Mrs. Shin, his equal, his match, his... He stopped that thought. Didn't deserve to finish it yet. Then he saw what she was drawing. His tattoo, the lotus. She'd sketched it from memory with remarkable accuracy. Every petal, every shadow, every line. But she'd added something. Where the knife wound bisected the design, she'd drawn the petals growing back together, intertwined with something new. Cherry blossoms, beauty from violence, growth from scars. "You have a good memory," he said quietly. She jumped, sketchbook nearly tumbling from her lap. He caught it, his hand brushing hers, that electric touch that still made his pulse spike. "I didn't hear you." She reached for the book, but he held it, studying her work. "This is beautiful." He traced the sketched petals. "But I don't have cherry blossoms. Not yet." She met his eyes, and something in her gaze made his breath catch. "But you could, after the wound heals, if you wanted." "Why cherry blossoms?" "Because they bloom every year. No matter how harsh the winter, they always come back." Her voice softened, like hope. He handed back the sketchbook and sat beside her, careful not to pull the healing stitches. The rain had stopped, leaving everything clean and glistening. Soul spread below them, the city lights just beginning to flicker on. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Always. The lotus. Why that design?" "You told me it grows from mud, but there's more to it, isn't there?" Ji-sok was quiet for a long moment. He'd never explained it, not to Minseo, not to his lieutenants, not to anyone. But Kendra had earned his truths. She'd bled for them. "After Minseo died, I became something worse than what I already was. Ruthless. Empty. I burned everything that reminded me I was human." He touched the tattoo through his shirt, feeling the raised scar beneath. "One night, I was ready to end it. Had the gun loaded. Then my grandmother called. She was dying, wanted to see me one last time." He smiled at the memory, bitter and sweet. "She took one look at me and said, 'You look like mud, Ji-sok ah.' dark and dirty and useful for nothing. I told her that's what I was, and she laughed. He shook his head. She said, "Mud is where the lotus grows. The dirtier the water, the more beautiful the flower. You think you're ruined, but you're just growing in the dark. Reach for the light, and bloom." His voice cracked. She died that night. I got the tattoo the next day, to remember that even in the worst mud, even being what I am, maybe something beautiful could still grow. Kendra's eyes shimmered with tears. Did it? Did you bloom? Not until you. The confession escaped before he could stop it. I thought the lotus was a lie, a pretty picture covering something dead. But then you walked into my world and looked at me like I was human, like I was worth. He stopped, swallowed hard. You stayed when you should have run. You held my hand when I was bleeding. You asked about my heart when you could have just taken the money and kept your distance. He turned to face her fully, and the vulnerability in his expression stole her breath. You asked me why a lotus, he said. It's the only flower that grows from the dirt and still reaches for the light. Still blooms despite everything. I thought I'd forgotten how. His hand came up to cradle her face, thumb brushing away a tear she didn't know had fallen. But you taught me. Every day you stayed. Every time you looked at me without fear. You've been the light I was reaching for. Jisog, I love you. The words tumbled out raw, unguarded, terrifying. I didn't mean to. Didn't plan it. It was supposed to be a transaction. But somewhere between the contract and Jeju and watching you refuse to leave my side when I was bleeding, his voice broke. I fell in love with my fake wife. And I have no idea what to do about it except tell you the truth. All of it. I love you, Kendra. Every stubborn, brilliant, beautiful part of you. The garden fell silent except for the gentle drip of rain from cherry blossom branches. Kendra's tears fell freely now. She reached up and covered his hand with hers, pressing it harder against her cheek. Then let me be your light, she whispered. Stop reaching for it. I'm already here. I've been here. I'm not going anywhere. His eyes widened. Kendra, I love you. Her voice was steady despite the tears. I fought it. Told myself it was just survival instinct or Stockholm syndrome or temporary insanity. But when you took that knife from me, when I thought I'd lose you, she shook her head. I realized I'd already given you something I didn't know I had. My heart. All of it. Just like you gave me yours. You mean, all 13 inches. She smiled through her tears. I want them. Every beat. Every broken piece. Every dark corner you think is too damaged to love. I want all of it, Jisok. I want you. For a moment, he just stared at her like she'd spoken a miracle into existence. Then he kissed her. Not the claiming kiss from their wedding. Not the phantom almost kiss from his study. This was everything they'd been holding back, weeks of tension and fear and longing released in a single moment. His lips met hers with devastating gentleness, like she was something sacred he'd been entrusted to protect. His hand slid into her hair, cradling the back of her head. Her hands found his chest, feeling the 13 inches beating wildly beneath her palms. The kiss deepened, slow, thorough, certain. He tasted like whiskey and rain and promises finally kept. She felt like coming home and falling and flying all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. Say it again, he whispered. I love you. Again. I love you, Jisok Shin. Every mud-covered, lotus-blooming inch of you. He laughed, the sound bright and disbelieving and full of joy she'd never heard from him before. Then he kissed her again. Softer this time. Reverent. We're going to rewrite the contract, he murmured against her lips. No end date. No divorce clause. What are you saying? He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes, those storm-gray eyes now clear and bright and full of love. I'm saying marry me again. For real this time. Not for visas or business or protection. Marry me because you love me. Because I love you. Because we're both broken things that somehow bloom together. Kendra smiled, radiant and certain. Yes. Above them, cherry blossoms fell like blessings. Below them, soul glittered with possibility. And between them, 2 hearts 13 inches each beat in perfect synchrony. The lotus had finally bloomed, and the light had come home. The seaside villa on Namhae Island wasn't like the penthouse or the Jeju estate. No glass walls or modern minimalism. Just weathered wood and stone, perched on cliffs where the ocean threw itself against ancient rocks in eternal rhythm. Jisok had bought it quietly, 3 months after the garden terrace confession. No lieutenants. No guards posted at every corner. Just a place where the most dangerous man in Seoul could pretend, for brief stolen moments, to be simply human. Where he could be hers? Kendra stood on the wooden deck, watching the sun sink into the East Sea, painting everything in shades of amber and rose gold. The smell of salt and pine filled the air. Somewhere below, waves crashed and retreated, the heartbeat of the world. She wore one of his white shirts, barefoot, her hair loose and tangled from the wind. 6 months ago, she would have carefully styled herself, afraid of appearing less than perfect. Now she knew he preferred her like this, unguarded, real, his. Arms wrapped around her waist from behind. Ji-sok's chin rested on her shoulder, his chest warm against her back. The scar from Jeju had healed into a silver line bisecting the lotus. He'd added cherry blossoms, just like her sketch. Beauty from violence, growth from scars. "Come inside," he murmured against her neck. "I have something for you." "Another surprise?" She turned in his arms. "You know I don't need." "I know." He kissed her forehead, soft and reverent. "But I want to. Humor me." She followed him inside, where the villa's main room glowed with warm light from the fireplace. And there, arranged in a perfect circle on the low table, were 13 candles. White, tall, unlit. Kendra's breath caught. "Sit," Ji-sok said gently, guiding her to the floor cushions. He sat across from her, the candles between them, and produced a lighter. "Do you remember," he began, lighting the first candle, "the night you asked me what I meant? The wedding night, when I left you with a riddle instead of an answer? I remember thinking you were insane." He smiled, that genuine smile that still made her heart stutter. "Not insane. Terrified." Second candle lit. "I just bound myself to a woman I barely knew. A woman who looked at me like I was human when the rest of the world sees a monster. And I wanted..." Third candle. "I needed you to understand what you'd signed up for wasn't just a contract." Fourth candle. Fifth. The light grew, casting dancing shadows across his face. "I thought I was clever. That I'd hook you with mystery. Keep you curious enough to stay while I figured out what the hell I was feeling." Sixth. Seventh. "But the truth is, I'd already decided that night, looking at you in that crimson dress, standing in my world like you belonged there." Eighth candle. "I knew I'd give you everything, whether you wanted it or not." Ninth. 10th. His hands were steady, but his voice wavered. "You were supposed to be my shield. A wife to legitimize my business. To keep rivals guessing. To make me look stable and human and safe." 11th candle. Instead 12th. "You became my salvation." He lit the 13th candle. The circle was complete, glowing like a crown between them. 13 candles, he said quietly. "One for each inch of the heart I gave you that night. The heart I promised was yours. Every beat, every broken piece." Tears blurred Kendra's vision. "Ji-sok, I'm not finished." He stood and began unbuttoning his shirt. She'd seen the lotus hundreds of times, now traced its petals in the dark, kissed the scar that split it, memorized every line. But when he opened his shirt completely and the candlelight hit his chest, she saw something new. There, in the center of the lotus, where the scar crossed and the cherry blossoms bloomed, was a new addition. A small anatomical heart precisely detailed, beautiful in its realism. And beneath it, in eloquent script, Kendra, her name, etched into his skin forever, claimed not by contract but by choice. "When did you..." She couldn't finish the question. "Last week, while you were visiting your mother in Kingston." He knelt beside her, took her trembling hand, and placed it over the tattoo. Over her name, over his heart. "I wanted you to have it in writing. Permanent. Irrevocable." She felt his heart beating beneath her palm, that 13-inch heart that had kept its promise, that beat for her when she was scared, that bled for her in Jeju, that loved her despite every reason not to. "Do you understand now?" he asked, covering her hand with his. "What I meant that night. What I've been trying to tell you since the moment we met." She looked up at him, this dangerous, beautiful, impossible man who'd started as a stranger with a contract and become her home. The candlelight painted him in gold and shadow, turning him into something from a dream. "You gave me all 13 inches, she whispered. "Every single one." He pulled her closer, until she was in his lap, wrapped in his arms, surrounded by candlelight. The good parts. The dark parts. The parts that remember Mincio and the parts that are learning to love again. The businessman. The monster. The man who lights candles and gets tattoos because he doesn't know how else to say, "I love you." His forehead pressed against hers, his breath warm on her lips. "I was hollow for so long," he confessed. "Just going through motions. Surviving but not living. Then you crashed into my world and demanded I feel again. Demanded I be human. And God, Kendra, it terrified me. Still terrifies me, because loving you means having something to lose again. Then we're both terrified." She cupped his face, thumb tracing the scar through his eyebrow. "Because losing you would destroy me. But loving you, she kissed him softly. Loving you makes me whole. He kissed her back deep and slow and certain, the kind of kiss that spoke of forever, of promises kept, of two broken people who'd found a way to bloom together in the mud. When they broke apart, he gathered her closer, her ear pressed against his chest. She listened to the steady rhythm beneath her name, beneath the lotus, beneath the scars. Thump thump, thump thump, thump thump. 13 inches of muscle and blood and love, all hers. Thank you, he whispered into her hair. For what? For asking the question, for staying when I was bleeding, for loving me despite excellent reasons not to, for being the light I didn't know I was reaching for. Kendra smiled against his chest. Thank you for giving me all 13 inches, for making me your wife, your equal, your salvation. Outside, the ocean continued its eternal rhythm. The sun had fully set, leaving only stars and candlelight and the two of them wrapped in each other. From contract to devotion, from strangers to soulmates, from hollow to whole, the lotus had bloomed, the light had stayed, and the heart that had once been empty now beat with fierce, eternal love. Stay with me, Jisok whispered, though it wasn't really a question anymore. Always, Kendra answered, and meant it with every fiber of her being. 13 candles burned between them, a crown of light, a promise fulfilled, a love story written in fire and ink, and the steady beating of two hearts that had found their home in each other. And somewhere in the darkness, where the ocean met the sky, the world kept turning. But here in this villa, in this moment, in this embrace, time stood still. Perfect, complete, eternal. And that, my friends, is how a fake marriage became forever. If Kendra and Jisok's story wrecked you emotionally, you're not alone. Drop a comment telling me your favorite part. My best friend said this story wouldn't get 500 likes. Let's prove her absolutely wrong. Smash that like button, subscribe if you haven't already. And here's the best part, I've got another story queued up that's just as intense. Click the video on your screen right now to keep the romance going. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. See you in the next one.